Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to follow. And as always, a massive shout out and a huge thank you to every single one of you supporting me over on Patreon. Again, I really do appreciate it, and I couldn't do this without you, so thank you so very much. So, a little while back during my battle analysis of the titanic clash between Kenpachi, Byakuya, and Toshiro, and their enemy, Sternritter M, the Miracle Gerard Valkyrie, I theorised that Gerard was in fact some kind of reanimated Quincy golem. Being that he supposedly embodied the power of the Soul King's heart, it made sense to me that seemingly endless life had been bestowed upon him. That, combined with the oddities of his design, his artificial-looking eyes, lack of fingernails, and even if you look closely, strangely plastic-looking hair, really stood out to me, and he looked like some kind of homunculus of sorts. I also speculated that the key to destroying Gerard for good lay in the Quincy cross that appeared in the sky after Kenpachi cut the Sternritter clean in two with his bankai. In my opinion, Kubo presents us here with a perfectly acceptable way of killing Gerard. It seems like as almost an embodiment of the fact that he bears the power of the heart of the Soul King, probably reflected in his near-eternal life. Everything he is revolves around this central Quincy cross that seems to lift his body back up and stitch it back together again. He is like some kind of ancient resurrected Quincy golem, with a core that's alive and the rest of him is this weird blank slate almost, which might go to explain why he has these really weird inhuman eyes, why he is missing fingernails, these strange details that make him appear like some kind of synthetic being. All of this would make so much sense. Everything after this moment, after Zaraki went to great lengths to reveal the Quincy cross as Gerard's sole point of weakness, should have been focused on destroying that cross and therefore killing Gerard permanently, but instead it's never brought up again and Gerard simply doesn't die. That Quincy cross seemed to be directly connected to Gerard himself, going so far as to drag his blood and the lifeless halves of his body back together again, stitching Gerard whole once more with an angelic, holy light. Outside of Aizen, who had been infused with the Hogyoku, we'd never seen anything or anyone like Gerard before. His ability to continuously resurrect himself after death, after being killed not once, not twice, but on 3 separate occasions during his bout with the captains, making him nearly impossible to truly defeat. If he was indeed supposed to be some kind of revived golem, or as I've since theorised, a gallant medieval warrior who was resurrected after some ancient battle to play host to the Soul King's heart, then he should have a core. A singular core that controls his very being, that acts as his very lifeblood. And so I thought that if the captains managed to target that cross in the moment it was exposed and shatter it, Gerard might actually stay dead. It was only a theory. After all, despite this moment in the source material, the cross not only never shows up again, despite Gerard's body being destroyed for a second time after this, but is never even acknowledged by anyone there in that moment. However, in his latest Club Outside Q&A, Kubo seems to have actually confirmed my theory, that the key to permanently killing Gerard Valkyrie indeed lay in that Quincy cross, his very core, that acted as his beating heart. So let's take a look first at what Kubo had to say. So the question that was posed to him reads as follows. Gerard's Shrift M the Miracle holds the ability to strengthen the injured part of a body via gigantification. When Gerard was cut in half by Zaraki Kenpachi's bankai, something similar to a Quincy cross came flying out of his head. Would it be correct to assume that it was Gerard's core and that had it been destroyed, Gerard would have been defeated? And Kubo's answer, as always, is fairly to the point, saying, had it been destroyed, he would have been defeated, had he been capable of destroying it. The excellent translation of this comment is thanks to M Shadows, and you can find a link in the description to where they've been diligently translating many of the Q&A segments from Kubo himself. And so there we have it, a concrete way to permanently kill Gerard Valkyrie. If you're able to break the cross, presumably before it resurrects Gerard once more, he should stay dead for good. This is honestly really big news and very exciting. Outside of my prediction being correct, I'm happy about this for a variety of different reasons. Firstly, this is a key weakness for a character who otherwise didn't seem to have any. Although I always thought their divine powers were perfectly fitting for essentially God's holiest and most devout of protectors, people, I think, fairly criticised abilities like the miracle for being unreasonably broken, or at the very least seemingly having no discernible weaknesses. Not even the combination of Kenpachi's bankai, Toshiro's matured bankai, and Byakuya's ultimate attack could put Gerard down once and for all. But it also grounds the ability somewhat too. Gerard doesn't just have access to limitless lives for no reason with no potential hang-up whatsoever. There is a way to put a stop to it, and it does lend credence to the idea that yes, he's meant to be a revenant of sorts. I only wish Kubo had put more emphasis on this in the actual story itself. Which actually brings me to my next point. The fact that Kubo included the scene of Gerard being revived by his Quincy cross only to never focus on it again is definitely weird. Due to the cross only appearing once, I think a lot of readers fairly believed it was simply Gerard activating Volstendig, which is technically true. After the cross revives him and stitches his body back together again, he explodes in a flash of heavenly light and appears in his holy form, Ashtonig. But as I speculated before, the fact even his blood seemed to be drawn towards the cross implied that the cross itself was in some kind of control, or had some kind of power over Gerard's very essence, his very existence. It is very similar to the Hogyoku in that sense, which again is a cool parallel. The idea that the Hogyoku is essentially a man-made version of the Soul King's heart again goes some way towards explaining the Hogyoku's own divinity. While it's currently impossible to say for sure, I'd argue the Hogyoku is ultimately stronger than whatever power Gerard possesses, though, as destroying the Hogyoku itself doesn't at least seem, on the outside, to be a possibility. But yeah, it is weird that we never see this again, especially if Kubo had this in mind the whole time, and I'm inclined to believe that he did, hence the weirdness of Gerard's design and the focus on this moment in the source material. It's odd then that when Byakuya shatters the frozen Gerard's head later on and his body crumbles to the ground, the cross is nowhere to be seen. Did Kubo forget about it in this moment, or decide instead that he didn't actually have the time to deal with this? Because as again I mentioned in my analysis of their fight, that would have made for an ideal ending to the battle. All three captains come together to demolish Gerard's body, but suddenly he begins to revive again. However, this time Byakuya glances upwards into the sky and sees the cross struggling to rebuild this Goliath, and with a flick of his wrist, throws one last blade of Senkei towards the cross, impaling and shattering it. And with that, the light around Gerard's body diminishes, leaving only his frozen legs. Of course, if Kenpachi's bankai can't break the cross, and we're assuming that's who Kubo is referring to in his answer to that question, then a mere blade of Senbon Zakura wouldn't be able to either. But Kubo could have introduced an element of the cross weakening over time, perhaps as it continuously revives its host, making it more susceptible to damage in the end. Maybe Kenpachi did strike the cross with a glancing blow in his bankai as he bifurcated Gerard, and that damaged it enough to the point where Byakuya would be able to finish it off later on. I think that, or something akin to that, would have worked really well, and we'll talk about it further later on in the video. So another question is, what exactly is this cross? Is it a literal Quincy cross just imbued with this power? If Gerard was a Quincy, not necessarily even the modern day incarnation prior to receiving the Soul King's heart, I guess it works. It's almost like when he died and was revived, his heart was actively replaced by this cross instead. As far as I'm concerned, Gerard, it's possible he existed before Yuha Bark himself. Yuha Bark is approximately 1500 years old, based on information we can glean from the Friend flashback, and I can't help but wonder if Gerard comes from a time before even that, as we know Gerard had this power before meeting his would-be king. Or is this not a real cross at all, and is it just an embodiment of the Soul King's power taken physical form? That could make sense. We've seen already that pieces of the Soul King believe themselves to be intrinsically Quincy, though that could just be due to their affiliation with Yuha Bark. Also, considering Gerard's massive size at the time he is cut in half, and the fact the cross is visible in the way it is, it's clearly also enormous as well, which it would imply it can change in accordance to Gerard's own size, so it can't be a literal Quincy cross the same as many sternritter have attached to pendants and the like. Another thing that's interesting to mention is that while Kubo states that yes, if the cross is destroyed, so is Gerard, he also quickly tacks on at the end that if Zaraki had been capable of destroying it, then it would have been broken. This definitely implies that even in Bankai, Zaraki may not have had the strength necessary to break the cross at all. And I did wonder if Zaraki actually struck the cross during his attack or simply missed it, because he does cut Gerard entirely in half. So I feel like he must have missed it personally, because otherwise he would have been rebounded about halfway down Gerard's torso when he came into contact with the cross itself. And this, in fact, leads me on to the next point I wanted to discuss. With this revelation, do I still think Gerard Valkyrie is the strongest sternritter of them all? In a pretty old video now, I ranked every single sternritter from weakest to strongest, capping off by declaring I thought Gerard came out on top as the ultimate sternritter. Not only did he have essentially immortality, but he combined that with incredible physical power, the magical ability of his blade Hoffnung, and many lifetimes worth of warrior's experience to boot. He himself even claims to be the one who has been bestowed with everything. And while it's a fairly hard and fast rule in Bleach that you shouldn't take a villain's own proclamations at face value, Kubo was also piling on the evidence as well, as Gerard immediately sees through both Byakuya and Hitsugaya's plan to kind of attack him in secret and surprise him. It also makes sense narratively for Gerard to be considered the strongest overall Quincy, as he is the final hurdle in the Varvelt subsection of the arc before those last two battles can take place, Uryu versus Hashwolf and Ichigo and Orihime versus Yuha Bark. Gerard also acts as the ultimate final defender of not just Yuha Bark himself, but also the very foundation of their new world, which is the Varvelt Palace, with Gerard, after resurrecting, even claiming that he will continue to swing his sword even in death for his master. However, despite all of this, I'd argue this revelation possibly brings his status as the top sternritter into question. Where before it seemed like the only way to truly bring Gerard down was to have God himself intervene in what could be genuinely described as a miracle, now we know there's an actual way to kill him. As far as I'm concerned, this puts him a step behind his closest counterpart, Lil Barrow. Kyoraku and Nanao weren't even landing a hit on Lil in his holy form without the aid of Kyoraku's bankai, and then after that, there was absolutely nothing they could do without Nanao's ancestral Zanpakuto, which I've already said was convenient at best. If anyone else is fighting Lil Barrow, I don't even know how they would begin to hurt him. Being able to phase through all attacks makes Lil virtually unkillable, and even with Nanao's blade, which again, like I said, no one else in Bleach would have access to, it didn't do the job, it didn't finish the job, it simply dispelled Lil's power, splitting him up into much weaker forms. Meanwhile, Lil has displayed and presumably has therefore a similar level of skill and experience to Gerard, and while they're inherently different fighters, Gerard being predominantly up close and more focused on melee combat, whereas Lil is a ranged sniper, Lil is the leader of the Schutzstaffel for a reason. The real question I think left to be posed in a bout between these two is, how durable is Gerard's cross? Because with Kubo implying in his answer that Kenpachi's bankai didn't have what it takes to break it, then perhaps Gerard still comes out on top, as I'm not sure Lille can muster any kind of one physical assault that would match Kenpachi's bankai. It's really tough to say. I guess what I'm getting at is that presumably if everyone came together and attacked Gerard's cross once exposed, there's a chance the fight would be over. Meanwhile, Lille is simply not going to die without the intervention of the Shinken Hakkyoken or any similar relic. Honestly, there's a lot going on here, and I think it would make for an interesting versus battle one day in the future. I mean, for example, would Lille in Volstendig be hurt by damaging Hoffnung? I think he probably would, which would again go back to giving Gerard the advantage overall. The last point I want to make about this revelation relates back to my idea for how the battle could have ended in a more satisfying way. In the source material, rather than bring the cross back in any form, Kubo simply has Gerard regenerate again, only to eventually be killed by Yuhabak's Auschweilen. This makes sense, as Gerard's body is likely held together by pure power, especially at this point in the fight. And if he really is just some kind of rejuvenated golem or a walking corpse, then again it makes sense that everything about him would be stored in this central core. Presumably the Auschweilen affected the cross directly and robbed it, and subsequently Gerard, of everything they had. But now we know for certain that the cross is central to Gerard's existence. I wonder if we'll see any major changes to this fight in the anime. We talked before about the possibility of Can't Fear Your Own World taking up the fourth core of the adaptation, and while it's still possible, especially if they split the Thousand Year Blood War into 3 distinct sections, that's not what I would want the most at all. More than anything, I want the Thousand Year Blood War arc to get the love and care it deserves, including extending all fights that need it in both the Second Invasion and Varvelt. I especially want to see Uryu versus Hashwolf be properly fleshed out, but as far as the Schutzstoffel fights go, Gerard's is the shortest in terms of actual on-screen combat, and it deserves a proper ending. With Kubo highlighting this point by choosing to answer it as part of his Q&A, I can't help but wonder if this might be amended, and the captains will discover Gerard's weakness and try to capitalise on it. For example, the anime could easily show the cross rebuilding Gerard's body again with holy light after the team-up completely shatters him to pieces. That's another interesting point though. Considering Gerard's body does collapse like that and yet he still revives, the cross must not be a literal part of his makeup, and is perhaps instead just a manifestation of power that appears visible to the eye every now and then, presumably when it's actually activating. So yeah, I would love to see the anime amend the ending of this fight. It's not like Yuhaba even really needed to steal Hashwolf and Gerard's powers. It was mostly done because Kubo needed to wrap things up due to his declining health. And here we have time to really get into the weeds of the fight with Kubo's blessing and with his oversight. Now, admittedly, there are some elements of the current ending I do actually quite like. For example, it does feel like the captains got their much-needed miracle after all that could only be given to them by the closest thing to God in that universe currently, which ironically was their enemy. But still, I'd trade it in a heartbeat for a true ending involving the captains actually working together and getting the win. But that's it for the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about Kubo's comments regarding the true nature of Gerard Valkyrie's The Miracle and how it actually seemingly grounds his power. Does it make him weaker in your eyes? Again, it's so hard to say because we have no idea how durable this cross actually is, only that Kubo himself seems to think that Kenpachi Zaraki's bankai probably wouldn't have been enough alone. But I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think about my ideas regarding extending this fight in the anime, or Gerard versus Lille, who comes out on top now we know the truth behind how the miracle actually works? Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't done already, guys. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.